Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive into today's case, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below and tell me your location, city, state, or country, what time it is where you are. Are you watching this over morning coffee in New York? During your lunch break in London? Late at night in Australia? Let me know. I love seeing how our true crime community spans the entire globe. Let's build a map of where our community is. Comment below. In the quiet hours before dawn on March 24, 1998, the Caribbean Sea lay calm and dark beneath the hull of the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas. Most passengers slept peacefully in their cabins as the vessel sat anchored just off the coast of Curaçao, a jewel of an island in the Dutch Caribbean. But in cabin D109, Ron Bradley stirred awake around 5:30 in the morning. He stepped out onto the small balcony and glanced down. There, in the pre-dawn stillness, he saw his daughter Amy, 23 years old, lounging peacefully on a deck chair. She appeared relaxed, perhaps watching the first hints of sunrise paint the horizon. Ron went back inside, relieved that his daughter was safe and enjoying the quiet morning. 30 minutes later, when he stepped back onto the balcony to check on her again, the chair was empty. Amy Lynn Bradley was gone. She would never be seen by her family again. What happened in those 30 minutes remains one of the most baffling maritime mysteries of modern times. This is the story of Amy Bradley, a young woman whose disappearance would spark a decades-long investigation, countless theories, mysterious sightings, and a family's unwavering determination to find answers. Amy Lynn Bradley was born on May 12, 1974, in Petersburg, Virginia. She grew up as a bright, athletic young woman with striking green eyes and a warm smile. Those who knew her described Amy as someone full of life, someone who made friends easily and approached the world with genuine kindness. By 1998, Amy had recently graduated from Longwood University with a degree in physical education. She was a trained lifeguard, comfortable in water, strong and capable. She worked at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse to support herself while planning her next steps. Amy had recently reduced her hours at the restaurant because she'd secured a new position at a computer consulting firm, set to begin when she returned from what was meant to be a relaxing family vacation. During her college years, Amy had come out to her family as gay. While her father later admitted it wasn't what they would have chosen for her, he emphasized that they loved her unconditionally. It was Amy's life, and they supported her completely. She had recently ended a relationship with her girlfriend, but friends said she seemed in good spirits, looking forward to new beginnings. Amy had a beloved bulldog named Daisy waiting for her at home. She had a new apartment. She had plans. Everything in her life pointed toward a future she was actively building. Ron Bradley, Amy's father, worked hard to provide for his family. When his employer announced an all-expenses-paid Caribbean cruise as a prize, Ron couldn't believe his luck. It was the perfect opportunity for the Bradley family to spend quality time together. The trip would take them aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas, a massive cruise ship capable of carrying 2,400 passengers and 765 crew members. The itinerary promised sun-soaked days and tropical nights, with stops in some of the Caribbean's most beautiful destinations. For Ron and his wife Iva, it was a chance to create lasting memories with their 2 adult children, Amy and her younger brother, Brad, who had just returned home from college. Amy was initially apprehensive about the cruise. She had always been afraid of heights, and the sheer size of ocean-going vessels made her nervous. The thought of being out on the open ocean, so far from shore, unsettled her. But the excitement of having her brother home and the prospect of a family adventure won out over her fears. On March 21, 1998, the Bradley family flew from Virginia to Puerto Rico. There, they boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, their floating hotel for the next week. The ship gleamed white in the Caribbean sun, a marvel of modern engineering and luxury. None of them could have imagined what lay ahead. The first days of the cruise passed pleasantly. The Bradley family settled into the rhythm of life at sea. There were meals in the dining room, shows in the evening, and long stretches of time to simply relax. The ship sailed from Puerto Rico toward Aruba, then on toward Curaçao, each island more beautiful than the last. Amy and Brad, close in age and temperament, spent time together exploring the ship and enjoying the amenities. They would swim, sunbathe, and in the evenings, join other passengers in the ship's nightclub, where a band called Blue Orchid provided entertainment. Blue Orchid was made up of professional musicians who worked the cruise circuit. They played covers of popular songs, keeping passengers dancing late into the night. Among the band members was a bass player with distinctively dyed yellow hair. He went by the nickname Yellow, though his real name was Alistair Douglas. He was from Aruba, charismatic and friendly, and he often mingled with the passengers between sets. The Bradleys were having the vacation they'd hoped for. The tropical air, the gentle rocking of the ship, the sense of being away from everyday concerns. It all felt like a well-deserved break. But beneath the surface of this perfect cruise, something was about to go terribly wrong. On the evening of March 23rd, the Rhapsody of the Seas was docked just offshore of Curacao. The island's lights twinkled in the distance as passengers prepared for another night of entertainment aboard the ship. Amy and Brad decided to check out the nightclub after dinner. Their parents, Ron and Iva, retired earlier, content to let their adult children enjoy the evening. The nightclub was crowded and warm, filled with the sound of Blue Orchid playing and passengers laughing and dancing. Amy wore a white cotton shirt and denim shorts. Her green eyes sparkled in the dim lights of the club. She moved easily through the crowd, at home in the social atmosphere. At some point during the evening, Amy began dancing with Yellow, the bass player. Video footage from the ship's cameras, later reviewed by investigators, captured this interaction. The two moved to the music, talking and laughing. To observers, it seemed like harmless fun, the kind of fleeting connection that happens all the time on cruise ships. But something else was happening that night, something that Amy's family would later find deeply disturbing. Throughout the evening, a waiter repeatedly approached the Bradley family, asking them to pass a note to Amy. The note was an invitation for her to go drinking with him once they reached shore. The family found the persistence odd and somewhat inappropriate, but they didn't think much of it at the time. Amy and Brad stayed in the nightclub until around 1 in the morning. When they finally called it a night, Amy seemed tired but happy. She'd had a few drinks over the course of the evening but wasn't intoxicated. The siblings made their way back to their cabin, where their parents were already asleep. The family shared cabin D109, a modest space with a small balcony overlooking the ocean. Amy changed into more comfortable clothes, a white t-shirt with the name of a rock band on it, and settled in for the night. Her brother saw her briefly before heading to his own sleeping area. These would be the last normal moments Amy Bradley would ever know. Ron Bradley was an early riser. Around 5:30 on the morning of March 24th, as the sun began its slow climb above the Caribbean horizon, he woke naturally. The cabin was still dark, the air cool from the air conditioning. Ron stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. Looking down, he saw Amy lounging in a deck chair. She was awake, dressed in the same clothes from the night before. She appeared to be simply enjoying the quiet morning, watching the world wake up. Ron felt reassured seeing her there, safe and peaceful. He went back inside and returned to bed, thinking nothing unusual of the scene. But 30 minutes later, at approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, Ron woke again. This time, when he checked the balcony, Amy was gone. The deck chair sat empty. Her white polo shirt and pair of sandals remained behind, but Amy herself had vanished. Ron checked the bathroom. Not there. He looked throughout the small cabin. Nothing. A knot of worry began to form in his stomach. He woke Iva, and together they began searching the ship, thinking perhaps Amy had gone for an early morning walk or to get breakfast. Brad joined the search. The family walked the decks, checked the pools, looked in the dining areas. No sign of Amy. As minutes turned into an hour, their worry transformed into fear, then panic. At 7:50 in the morning, they went to the ship's purser desk to report Amy missing. The reaction they received would haunt them for years to come. When the Bradleys reported Amy missing, they expected immediate action. Instead, they encountered bureaucracy and hesitation. The purser's office informed them it was too early to make a ship-wide announcement. They would need to wait until most passengers had disembarked for their day in Curacao before announcing her disappearance over the PA system. The family was stunned. Their daughter was missing on a ship with thousands of people. Every minute that passed was a minute Amy could be in danger, a minute a potential witness's memory could fade, a minute that crucial evidence could be lost. But the crew insisted on their protocol. Finally, at 7:50 in the morning, more than an hour after Amy had been reported missing, an announcement crackled over the ship's speakers. "Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk?" It was a tepid request, one that many passengers likely ignored. There was no sense of urgency, no indication that this was a serious situation. Between 12:15 and 1 o'clock in the afternoon, crew members conducted a search of the ship, but by then, Amy had been missing for 7 hours. The delay in launching an immediate, comprehensive search would later be called a critical mistake, one that may have cost Amy her life. The Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard launched a search operation. Helicopters circled the waters around Curacao, their spotlights cutting through the waves. A radar-equipped plane joined the search. For 4 days, they scoured the ocean, looking for any sign of Amy. Royal Caribbean even chartered a private boat to continue the search after the official efforts ended. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no evidence that Amy had fallen into the water at all. Investigators initially considered two possibilities: that Amy had fallen overboard accidentally, or that she had taken her own life. But both theories quickly fell apart under scrutiny. Amy was a trained lifeguard, an excellent swimmer. If she had somehow fallen from the ship, though it was anchored and there was no rough weather, she would have been capable of swimming to shore or staying afloat until help arrived. The water was calm, the ship close to land. As for suicide, there was no evidence to support it. Amy had no history of depression or mental illness. She had plans, a new job starting, a life she was actively building. Her family and friends insisted she had no reason to take her own life. The FBI arrived to investigate. They interviewed crew members and passengers, collected what evidence they could from the cabin. But here, another problem emerged. The cabin had been cleaned by housekeeping before FBI agents had access to it. If there had been physical evidence, fingerprints, signs of a struggle, anything unusual, it had been wiped away. Yellow, the bass player Amy had been seen dancing with, became a person of interest. He was questioned by the FBI and agreed to take a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive. Brad Bradley would later recall something that struck him as deeply strange. Shortly after Amy's disappearance was announced, Yellow had approached him and said, "Hey man, I'm sorry to hear about your sister." But at that point, no announcement had been made to the general passenger population. How did Yellow know? The FBI found no concrete evidence to charge anyone with Amy's disappearance. Yellow maintained his innocence, claiming he'd simply heard rumors spreading among the crew. The investigation stalled. The ship eventually continued. The tourists tried to approach the woman to ask if she was okay, but she was accompanied by two men who quickly moved her away. The witnesses reported the sighting to authorities, but by the time anyone could follow up, the woman and the men were gone. A few years later, another witness came forward with an even more detailed account. David Carmichael, an American, said he had been walking along a beach in Curacao when he saw a woman who looked exactly like Amy. She had the Tasmanian devil tattoo. She appeared to be walking toward him, as if she wanted to say something, but then the two men with her steered her away. Carmichael later told investigators he believed one of the men was Alistair Douglas, the bass player from the ship. In 2005, 7 years after Amy's disappearance, the Bradley family received a package that would haunt them forever. An anonymous tipster had sent them a set of photographs that appeared to have been downloaded from an adult website based in the Caribbean. The images were explicit, degrading. They showed a woman who looked remarkably like Amy, though she appeared different. Gaunt, her eyes hollow and vacant. The woman in the photos bore Amy's distinctive tattoos. The Bradley family was devastated. If these photos were real, if this woman was their daughter, It suggested Amy had been forced into some kind of horrific situation. The FBI investigated the photos, but was unable to definitively confirm whether the woman was Amy. The images had been posted on various adult websites, but tracing their origin proved impossible. Were they evidence that Amy had been trafficked, or were they a cruel hoax designed to torment a grieving family? The photographs reinforced the family's growing belief that Amy had been targeted, abducted, and possibly sold into a trafficking network. It was a theory that law enforcement took seriously, especially given the number of reported sightings in the Caribbean over the years. One of the most compelling accounts came from Bill Hefner, a United States Navy veteran. According to Hefner, he had been at a brothel in Curacao in 1999 when he met a young woman who appeared to be working there against her will. The woman approached him and whispered urgently that her name was Amy Bradley, that she was from Virginia, and that she had jumped off a cruise ship to score drugs. Now, she said, she was being held captive and couldn't escape. Hefner claimed the woman said she needed help, but that the men controlling her were watching closely. Before he could do anything, she was pulled away. He said he regretted not acting immediately, not finding a way to help her. It wasn't until later, when he saw Amy's story on a television program, that he realized the woman he'd met might have been the missing cruise ship passenger. The story was difficult to verify. Hefner's account raised as many questions as it answered. Had Amy really said she jumped off the ship for drugs? That seemed entirely out of character for a woman with no history of drug use. Had she been forced to say that, coached by her captors to provide a false explanation? Or was Hefner's memory unreliable after so much time had passed? Despite the uncertainties, the FBI took the report seriously. It aligned with other sightings and the overall theory that Amy had been trafficked. Over the years, more people came forward with stories of seeing Amy, a woman in Barbados, a sighting in Jamaica. Each report was investigated, each one leading nowhere concrete but adding to the mounting evidence that Amy might have survived her disappearance, at least for a time. The problem was that many of these witnesses didn't come forward immediately. They'd seen something that seemed odd at the time. A woman who looked out of place, someone who seemed to be asking for help with her eyes, but hadn't understood the significance until later, when they saw Amy's story in the media or on websites dedicated to missing persons. This delayed reporting made verification nearly impossible. Memories faded. Details became uncertain. By the time investigators could follow up, the moment had passed, the potential evidence gone. The simplest explanation for Amy's disappearance is that she somehow fell from the ship into the ocean. Perhaps she woke early, went out on the balcony, became dizzy or disoriented, and tumbled over the railing. But this theory has significant problems. Amy was a trained lifeguard, comfortable in water. The ship was anchored close to shore in calm seas. Even if she had fallen, she would have been capable of swimming to the beach or staying afloat while calling for help. No one heard a splash. No one heard a cry for help. Moreover, the balcony railing was several feet high. It wouldn't be easy to accidentally fall over it, especially for someone of Amy's height and build. And why would she have left her shirt and sandals behind but taken nothing else? Why would she be out on the balcony in the quiet hours of the morning without her father noticing anything unusual? The theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Investigators ultimately ruled it out, though some cruise line officials continued to suggest it as the most likely explanation. Could Amy have taken her own life? Again, the evidence argues strongly against this. Amy had no history of depression, no suicide attempts, no warning signs. She had a job starting when she returned home. She had her beloved dog Daisy. She had friends, family, plans. People who knew Amy described her as optimistic and forward-thinking. Even if she had been going through some kind of internal struggle that she'd hidden from everyone, the timing and method don't make sense. Why would she choose that particular morning? Why would she leave her belongings behind in a way that suggested she intended to return? Like the accidental fall theory, suicide doesn't adequately explain what happened to Amy Bradley. A darker possibility is that Amy was killed aboard the ship, her body hidden or disposed of before it could be found. This theory suggests that someone, perhaps a crew member or another passenger, harmed Amy and then worked quickly to cover up the crime. There was a suspicious detail that lends some weight to this theory. Years after Amy's disappearance, a human jawbone washed ashore in Aruba. Authorities initially considered whether it might be connected to the Natalie Holloway case, another high-profile disappearance in the region. But they declined to conduct DNA testing to determine if the jawbone belonged to Amy Bradley or any other missing persons. The opportunity to potentially answer one of the case's biggest questions was lost. If Amy was killed aboard the ship, the disposal of her body would have required careful planning and opportunity. It would have needed to happen quickly, before the ship was searched, and it would have required someone with knowledge of the ship's layout and operations. But if this is what happened, why? What motive would someone have to kill Amy? Was it a crime of opportunity? A planned attack? The theory raises more questions than it answers. The theory that the Bradley family came to believe most strongly is that Amy was targeted, abducted, and sold into a human trafficking network. This would explain the sightings over the years, the photographs, the Navy veterans' account. It would explain why no body was ever found, why the trail went cold. Human trafficking is a documented problem in the Caribbean. Young women, particularly tourists who might not be immediately missed or whose disappearance might be attributed to an accident, can be vulnerable to predators. The fact that the ship was docked when Amy disappeared would have provided a window of opportunity for someone to remove her from the vessel. In this scenario, Amy might have been lured or forced off the ship in the early morning hours, possibly drugged or coerced. She could have been taken to Curacao, then moved to other islands as her captors attempted to keep her hidden and compliant. The sightings would represent moments when Amy was able to be seen in public, possibly trying to signal for help but unable to escape. This theory is heartbreaking but not implausible. It's the one that gives the most weight to the eyewitness accounts and the mysterious photographs. It's also the theory that offers a sliver of hope that Amy might still be alive somewhere, even decades later. Throughout all these theories, one name keeps appearing: Alistair "Yellow" Douglas. Amy was seen dancing with him hours before she disappeared. A witness claimed to see him with Amy on a beach after her disappearance. His daughter, Amica Douglas, appeared in the recent Netflix documentary to say she's not convinced her father had nothing to do with the case. According to Amica, when Yellow returned from that cruise, he seemed different, more distant, more troubled. She also discovered that he had a bag full of photographs of white women who were not her mother, which struck her as suspicious. Yellow has maintained his innocence throughout. He submitted to a polygraph test that was inconclusive. The FBI has never charged him with any crime related to Amy's disappearance. But the questions remain. Did he know something? Was he involved in some way? Or is he simply an unfortunate figure who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, forever connected to a tragedy he had no part in? For Ron, Iva, and Brad Bradley, Amy's disappearance became the defining event of their lives. They couldn't move forward. They couldn't accept that she was gone. They had to find answers. The family wrote letters to congressmen, foreign officials, even the White House, pleading for help with the investigation. They built a website dedicated to Amy's case, posting her photos and the details of her disappearance in hopes that someone, somewhere, might have information. They established a 24-hour hotline so that tips could come in at any time. They hired private investigators, spending their savings in the desperate hope that professional help might succeed where official channels had failed. They distributed thousands of flyers throughout the Caribbean, posted rewards, gave interviews to any media outlet that would listen. "My gut feeling to this day," Iva Bradley said in one interview, "was somebody saw her, somebody wanted her, and somebody took her." The family filed lawsuits against Royal Caribbean, claiming the cruise line had acted negligently in handling Amy's disappearance. They argued that the delayed search, the cleaned cabin, the lack of immediate action had all contributed to the failure to find their daughter. Royal Caribbean maintained they had acted appropriately and responsibly. The lawsuits were eventually dismissed in the year 2000, but the legal battles added another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. Living with unresolved grief is a special kind of torture. When someone dies, there's closure, painful as it is. There's a funeral, a burial, a chance to say goodbye. But when someone simply vanishes, every day is a new wound. Every phone call could be the one that brings answers. Every stranger on the street could be your missing loved one. The Bradley family lived in this liminal space for years. They couldn't mourn Amy because they didn't know for certain that she was dead. They couldn't celebrate her because they didn't know where she was or if she was suffering. They were trapped in an endless present tense, unable to move backward or forward. Brad Bradley, Amy's brother, has spoken about how the disappearance changed his life completely. The vacation that was supposed to be a happy family memory became the worst experience of his life. He's carried the weight of that morning, the last time he saw his sister, for decades. In the year 2010, 12 years after Amy's disappearance, a court officially declared her dead. For legal purposes, Amy Lynn Bradley was no longer a missing person. But for her family, nothing changed. Without a body, without answers, the declaration felt meaningless. Amy was still out there somewhere, in their hearts and minds, waiting to be found. In July 2025, Netflix released Amy Bradley is Missing, a 3-part documentary series directed by Ari Mark and Phil Lott. The series brought renewed attention to Amy's case, introducing her story to a new generation and providing the most comprehensive examination of the evidence to date. The documentary featured interviews with the Bradley family, FBI officials, witnesses, and even Amica Douglas, Yellow's daughter. It walked through the timeline of that fateful morning, explored the various theories, and gave voice to the pain and frustration that has haunted everyone connected to the case. One of the most important aspects of the documentary was its focus on Amy herself, not just as a missing person, but as a whole human being. For too long, Amy had been defined by her disappearance. The documentary worked to remind viewers that she was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had dreams and fears, strengths and vulnerabilities. She was more than a mystery. She was a person whose absence has left a hole in the world. The response to the documentary was overwhelming. Viewers around the world became invested in Amy's story. The case sparked discussions on social media, theories on forums, renewed interest from investigators. Most importantly, it generated new tips. The directors of the documentary reported receiving information from people who had never come forward before, though they declined to share details publicly out of respect for the ongoing investigation. Peter Valentine, chair of the Forensic Science Department at the University of New Haven and a former detective, has said that solving the Amy Bradley case now hinges on somebody remembering something. A detail they dismissed at the time, a sighting they didn't think was important, a conversation they overheard that might provide a crucial clue. Modern technology has made it easier to compare eyewitness accounts, to analyze photographs, to trace digital footprints. If Amy was trafficked, there might be records somewhere, financial transactions, travel documents, photographs that haven't yet been connected to her case. The FBI still considers the case open. The reward for information leading to Amy's whereabouts stands at $25,000. After 27 years, the investigation continues, fueled by the family's determination and the possibility, however slim, that Amy might still be found. Brad Bradley has been clear about his belief. He thinks Amy was targeted, abducted, and removed from the ship. He thinks she survived, at least for a time. He continues to hope that someone, somewhere, knows something that could bring his sister home. In the quiet hours of the morning on March 24, 1998, between the time Ron Bradley saw his daughter lounging peacefully on their cabin balcony and the moment he found the chair empty, something happened to Amy Lynn Bradley. In that 30-minute window, a life was changed or ended forever. Was she lured away by someone she'd met aboard the ship? Was she drugged, incapacitated, and spirited off to an uncertain fate? Did something more sinister occur aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas? Something that was then covered up in the confusion of the morning? Or is there some explanation no one has yet considered, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense? The Caribbean Sea that morning was calm, its surface reflecting the slowly brightening sky. Somewhere beneath those waters, or on the islands that dot the horizon, or in places we haven't yet imagined, lies the answer to what happened to Amy Bradley. Her family continues to search. Investigators continue to work. And somewhere, perhaps someone knows the truth. If you were on that cruise ship in March of 1998, if you were in Curacao or any Caribbean island in the months and years that followed, if you saw something that didn't seem quite right at the time. A young woman with green eyes, a Tasmanian devil tattoo, someone who looked like they needed help but couldn't ask for it. The Bradley family wants to hear from you. Because Amy Lynn Bradley, 23 years old, full of life and promise, didn't just vanish. Someone somewhere knows what happened to her. And until that person comes forward, until the truth is finally revealed, this mystery will remain. A haunting reminder that even in our modern, connected world, people can simply disappear, leaving behind only questions, grief, and the desperate hope that someday, somehow, there will be answers. The sea may keep its secrets, but the people who love Amy Bradley refuse to stop searching. Close your eyes and let yourself settle into the story. Tonight, we're traveling to the remote high country of Montana, where mountain peaks touch the clouds and silence stretches for miles. This is a tale of mystery, of a place where the wilderness keeps its secrets close. A story about Sarah Chen, a young woman who walked into the mountains one autumn evening and was never seen again. But this isn't a story of fear. It's a mystery wrapped in the quiet beauty of the American West, told gently, so you can drift peacefully as you listen. Take a deep breath. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. And let me tell you about the Whispering Pines Lodge and the woman who vanished there without a trace. The Whispering Pines Lodge sits at the end of a winding gravel road, 23 miles from the nearest town of Silver Creek, Montana. It's a place that time almost forgot. A rustic mountain retreat built in 1947 by a logging company that wanted to create a sanctuary for weary travelers. The lodge is constructed from massive timbers, dark with age, and surrounded by towering ponderosa pines that whisper constantly in the mountain breeze. Picture it now, a 3-story structure with a wraparound porch, weathered rocking chairs facing the valley below. Inside, there's a great room with a stone fireplace rising 2 stories high, antler chandeliers casting warm amber light, and the scent of pine resin and old leather furniture. The walls are adorned with black and white photographs from decades past, hunters with their prizes, families posing stiffly in their Sunday best, loggers taking a break from their labors. The lodge can accommodate 30 guests, but in October 2019, there were only 7 people staying there. It was the off-season, that quiet time after the summer tourists have left and before the winter ski enthusiasts arrive. The aspens had turned to gold, and the air carried that crisp bite that promises snow is coming soon. Sarah Chen arrived on October 15th, a Tuesday afternoon. She was 28 years old, a travel blogger from Seattle who had built a modest following documenting her adventures in remote places. Sarah specialized in what she called forgotten corners, the overlooked destinations that didn't make it into mainstream travel guides. The lodge owner, Margaret Hartley, a woman in her early 70s with steel gray hair pulled into a practical bun, checked Sarah in just after 2 o'clock. Margaret would later remember that Sarah seemed in good spirits. She carried a green backpack, a professional camera with multiple lenses, and a leather journal that Margaret noticed was worn at the edges, well used. "I'm so glad to be here," Sarah had said, her dark eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've been following this place online for months. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Authentic, untouched." Margaret showed her to room 12 on the 2nd floor. It was one of the smaller rooms, but Sarah had specifically requested it because it faced east, toward Mount Redemption, the highest peak visible from the lodge. The room had a simple iron bed frame with a patchwork quilt, a pine dresser with a small mirror, a wooden chair, and a window with lace curtains that had yellowed gently with age. Sarah spent the rest of that afternoon exploring the lodge grounds. The other guests reported seeing her taking photographs of the weathered barn behind the main building, of the old stone well that no longer held water, of the way the afternoon light filtered through the pines. She had dinner alone in the dining room, a hearty meal of elk stew and fresh bread, and chatted briefly with the cook, a young man named David Torres, about the best hiking trails in the area. After dinner, Sarah sat in the great room, writing in her journal by the firelight. Another guest, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Owens, remembered Sarah seemed peaceful, content. They had spoken briefly about the isolation of the place, how the nearest cell phone signal was a mile down the mountain road, how the stars at night were so clear you felt you could touch them. At 9:30, Sarah went upstairs to her room. Patricia heard her footsteps on the old wooden stairs, heard her door close. That was the last time anyone would hear Sarah Chen moving through the world. The next morning began like any other at Whispering Pines. Margaret Hartley rose at 5:30, as she had for 40 years, and started preparing breakfast. The old coffee percolator burbled on the stove. The scent of frying bacon drifted through the halls. By 7 o'clock, most of the guests had gathered in the dining room. But Sarah's seat remained empty. Margaret wasn't immediately concerned. Guests often kept their own schedules at the lodge, especially photographers chasing the morning light. But by 8:30, when Sarah still hadn't appeared, Margaret felt the first stirring of unease. She climbed the stairs to room 12 and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, called Sarah's name. Still nothing. Margaret used her master key and opened the door. The room was undisturbed. Sarah's green backpack sat on the chair, carefully organized. Her camera equipment was lined up on the dresser, 3 lenses, a battery charger, a cleaning cloth. Her journal lay on the bedside table, a pen marking a page. The bed had been slept in. The covers were pulled back, pillow still showing the impression of a head. But Sarah's hiking boots were gone. So was her blue fleece jacket, the one she'd worn at dinner. Margaret felt her heart begin to pound. She looked in the small bathroom. Sarah's toiletries were there, toothbrush, hairbrush, face cream. Everything was there except Sarah herself. Margaret hurried downstairs and called the lodge's handyman, Robert Bear McAllister, a local man in his 50s who knew these mountains better than anyone. Together, they searched the immediate grounds. The barn, the well, the storage sheds. Nothing. By 10 o'clock, they called the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Tom Whitmore arrived at noon with 2 deputies. He was a man who'd seen his share of missing persons cases in these mountains. Hikers who'd gotten lost, hunters who'd misjudged the distance, elderly folks who'd wandered from their campsites. Most of them turned up within 24 hours, cold and embarrassed but alive. But this case felt different from the start. The sheriff's investigation began with the room. Sarah's belongings told a story of someone planning to stay. Her laptop was there, password protected. Her phone was charging by the bed. It had died sometime during the night, the battery indicator showing 0. Her wallet contained her driver's license, 3 credit cards, and $247 in cash. Her car keys sat on the dresser. Her rental car, a silver Subaru Outback, was still parked in the gravel lot outside. Sheriff Whitmore interviewed each of the 7 guests staying at the lodge that night. Their accounts were consistent and unremarkable. Patricia Owens, 67, retired teacher from Billings. She had been reading in her room, directly above Sarah's, and heard nothing unusual. She had gone to bed at 10 and slept soundly until morning. James and Carol Brennan, both in their mid-50s, celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary. Their room was at the end of the hall. They had watched a movie on Carol's tablet until about 11, then gone to sleep. They saw and heard nothing. Marcus Webb, 42, a wildlife photographer from Denver. His room was across from Sarah's. He had been out taking night photographs of the stars until nearly midnight. When he'd passed Sarah's room on his way to his own, around 11:45, her light was off and he heard no sounds. David Torres, 26, the cook, lived in a small cabin behind the main lodge. He had cleaned the kitchen after dinner and gone to his cabin around 9:15. He saw Sarah heading upstairs, but nothing after that. Margaret Hartley and her husband, George, 74, who helped manage the lodge but whose arthritis kept him mostly in their ground floor apartment. Neither had heard anything unusual during the night. The search dogs arrived that afternoon. German shepherds trained in tracking, their handlers confident. But the trail went cold almost immediately. The dogs picked up Sarah's scent leading from the lodge's front door, down the porch steps, and onto the gravel driveway. Then the trail simply ended, as if she had vanished into thin air, or been picked up by a vehicle. But there were no vehicle tracks other than those already accounted for. And the sound of a car engine on that quiet mountain road would have been noticed. Let yourself relax deeper now as we move through this mystery together. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the gentle weight of your blanket. The story continues, calm and steady. In the days that followed, the search expanded. The Flathead County Search and Rescue Team mobilized. Volunteers came from Silver Creek and the surrounding communities. They formed lines and walked through the forests, calling Sarah's name until their voices grew hoarse. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned the mountainsides. Drones equipped with high-resolution cameras photographed every trail, every ravine, every hidden valley within a 10-mile radius. Local hunters who knew every deer path and elk trail joined the effort. The National Guard was called in on day 5. They found nothing, not a single footprint beyond that gravel driveway, not a scrap of blue fleece fabric caught on a branch, not a single clear indication of which direction Sarah had gone, or why she had left in the middle of the night wearing only her jacket and boots, leaving everything else behind. Sarah's family arrived on day 3. Her parents, Michael and Lou Chun, both professors at the University of Washington. Her younger brother, Daniel, a software engineer. They were devastated, bewildered. Sarah wasn't reckless, they insisted. She was careful, methodical. She always told people where she was going. She always checked in. But there had been no check-in. Sarah's last blog post had been published the evening before she arrived at the lodge, detailing her drive through Glacier National Park. Her last text message had been to her mother. "Made it to the lodge. It's perfect. Love you." That text had been sent at 2:47 p.m. on October 15th. The FBI got involved on day 7, concerned about the possibility of foul play. Special Agent Catherine Morrison led a team that conducted extensive interviews, background checks, digital forensics. They examined Sarah's laptop, her phone records, her social media accounts, her email. They found an ordinary life, work correspondence, plans with friends, conversations about weekend hikes and restaurant recommendations. No threats, no concerning relationships, no indication that Sarah was running from anything or planning to disappear. Agent Morrison also investigated the lodge itself and everyone associated with it. Margaret Hartley's finances, her background, her family history. Bear McAllister's record, he'd had a DUI 15 years ago, but nothing since. David Torres, the cook, was barely 5 years out of high school, working to save money for college. Every guest was vetted thoroughly. Everyone checked out. No criminal records, no connections to Sarah, no motive, no opportunity that anyone could determine. The prevailing theory became that Sarah had left the lodge in the early morning hours, perhaps unable to sleep, drawn by the idea of photographing the sunrise from a good vantage point. That she had slipped on loose rocks, perhaps fallen into one of the many ravines that cut through these mountains. That her body would be found when the snow melted in spring. But this theory had problems. Sarah was experienced. She had hiked in the Cascades, the Olympics, the Sierras. She knew not to hike alone in darkness without proper gear. She had left her headlamp, her GPS device, her emergency beacon all in her room. And there was the journal. Let the tension in your shoulders melt away as we turn to this next chapter. You're safe, warm, drifting gently. Sarah's journal became one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the case. It was a standard Moleskine notebook, black cover, cream pages covered in Sarah's neat handwriting. She had been keeping it for about 8 months, documenting her travels, her thoughts, her observations about the places she visited. The last entry was dated October 15, 2019, written sometime after dinner, probably while she sat by the fireplace in the great room. It read, "Finally here. The Whispering Pines Lodge is everything I hoped for and more. There's something timeless about this place, as if the modern world hasn't quite reached it. Margaret, the owner, has such kind eyes. She told me the lodge has been in her family for 3 generations. I can feel the history in these walls. Asterisk, room 12 is perfect. Simple, clean, with a view of the mountains that took my breath away. I watched the sunset paint the peaks pink and gold. Tomorrow, I want to hike to the overlook that Margaret mentioned, about 2 miles up the ridge trail. She says on a clear day you can see all the way to Canada. Asterisk. Something strange though. When I was taking pictures of the old barn, I felt like someone was watching me. Probably just the isolation getting to me, or maybe a deer in the trees. This place is so quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Asterisk. Going to read for a bit and then early to bed. Want to be up for sunrise. The light here is going to be incredible. Asterisk. That was the last entry. The next page was blank. But there was something else. When the FBI examined the journal under different lighting conditions, they discovered something that had been written and then carefully erased. On the blank page following Sarah's last entry, someone had pressed hard enough with a pencil that the indentation remained in the paper below. Using specialized photography techniques, they were able to read the ghosted text. It was an address, 14 Hollow Creek Road, Silver Creek, Montana, and a name, James Whitlock. This discovery energized the investigation. Deputies traced the address to an abandoned homestead about 15 miles from the lodge, down in the valley. James Whitlock had been a prospector who had lived there in the 1960s. He had died in 1987. The property had been uninhabited for decades. Why would Sarah have written down this address? How did she even know about it? There was no record of her researching the property online. No mention of it in her blog or emails. A team drove out to 14 Hollow Creek Road. They found the ruins of a small cabin. The roof collapsed, walls weathered to silver. A rusted truck frame sat in tall grass. The remains of a vegetable garden, long overgrown. A stone foundation that might have been a workshop or storage shed. They searched every inch. Used ground-penetrating radar to look for disturbed earth. Found nothing related to Sarah. But they did find something interesting in what remained of the cabin. Hidden under a rotted floorboard was a metal box. Inside were old newspaper clippings from the 1970s and 1980s, stories about missing persons in the area. 3 different cases over those 2 decades. A teenage girl who had been hiking near the lodge. A young man who had been fishing in the area. A woman in her 30s who had been staying at a different lodge, 5 miles away. All 3 had vanished without a trace. The cases had gone cold. Was there a connection? Or was James Whitlock just someone fascinated by unsolved mysteries, keeping his own morbid archive? Rest deeper into the story now. Let your breathing slow, your mind quiet. We're moving toward the heart of the mystery. As months passed with no break in the case, theories multiplied. The most rational explanation remained that Sarah had somehow left the lodge and met with an accident. The mountains are unforgiving. Bodies can remain hidden for years, decades even, in the dense forest or deep ravines. Despite the extensive searches, it's possible they simply missed her. But others pointed to stranger possibilities. Local residents began sharing old stories, tales passed down through generations. The Blackfeet people had long considered these mountains sacred, and some areas were said to be places where the veil between worlds was thin, where people could simply step through and never return. There were rumors about the lodge itself. Some former employees mentioned feeling uncomfortable in certain areas, especially in the East Wing where Room 12 was located. Sounds at night that couldn't be explained. The sensation of being watched. Margaret Hartley dismissed these stories. The lodge had been in her family for over 70 years, she said. It was just an old building making old building sounds. She'd raised her own children there, and they had been perfectly safe. Still, after Sarah's disappearance, Margaret had a local priest come and bless the building. For peace of mind, she said. For closure. The FBI looked into the possibility of trafficking. Montana, with its vast empty spaces and proximity to the Canadian border, had unfortunately seen such cases. But there was no evidence. No similar cases in the area. No pattern that fit. Some people online began connecting Sarah's disappearance to other unsolved cases in national parks and remote areas across the country. The missing 411 phenomenon, they called it. A researcher named David Paulides had documented hundreds of cases where people vanished in wilderness areas under unusual circumstances. The cases shared strange commonalities: no tracks, no scent trails, bad weather following the disappearance, locations near water or boulder fields. Sarah's case fit some of these patterns: the lack of tracks, the remote location, the sudden nature of the vanishing. But correlation isn't causation, as Agent Morrison liked to say. Sometimes there is no sinister explanation. Sometimes people simply get lost, have accidents, and are never found. Sarah's parents refused to give up. They established the Sarah Chen Foundation, dedicated to improving search and rescue operations in remote areas and supporting families of missing persons. Michael Chun retired from his professorship to work on it full-time. They returned to Montana every year on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, walking the trails, posting new flyers in Silver Creek and neighboring towns. The Whispering Pines Lodge struggled. Bookings dropped dramatically. People didn't want to stay in a place where someone had vanished. Margaret Hartley considered closing, but she was stubborn. "This lodge has survived worse," she said. "It'll survive this." And slowly, gradually, people began to return. The story faded from the news. Life continued its steady march forward. Let your body sink deeper into rest now. Feel the weight of comfort surrounding you. Let my voice guide you gently towards sleep. 5 years after Sarah Chen vanished, in the autumn of 2024, a forest ranger named Thomas Blackwell was conducting a routine survey in a remote section of the Flathead National Forest, about 12 miles northwest of the Whispering Pines Lodge. He was documenting wildlife populations, photographing areas that would need winter maintenance, marking trails. He found something unusual. Wedged between two large rocks in a steep ravine, concealed by brush that had grown around it, was a blue fleece jacket, faded by sun and weather, torn in places, but still recognizably blue. Thomas knew about Sarah's case. Everyone in the area did. He carefully marked the location with GPS coordinates and called the sheriff's office. Sheriff Whitmore, now in his early 60s and planning his retirement, drove out personally. The ravine was in an area that had been searched 5 years earlier, but it was steep, treacherous terrain. Easy to miss something hidden in the rocks. Easy for searchers to have passed right by. They retrieved the jacket carefully. The label had deteriorated, but when they checked Sarah's belongings, still stored at the sheriff's office, they found an order receipt. The jacket matched. Size, brand, color. This was Sarah's jacket, but there was nothing else. No other clothing, no remains, no signs that Sarah had been in that ravine. Just the jacket, as if it had been placed there deliberately or blown there by wind from somewhere else. The discovery reopened the investigation. New searches focused on the area around where the jacket was found. Cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, a renewed effort with new technology that hadn't been available 5 years earlier. Still nothing. The jacket's location added another layer of mystery. 12 miles from the lodge, in terrain that would be extremely difficult to traverse at night, in a direction that made no sense if Sarah had been trying to reach the road or any nearby settlement. Sarah's family took some comfort in the discovery. It was proof she had been out there, at least for a while. It suggested she hadn't been abducted from the lodge itself, hadn't been the victim of immediate foul play. She had walked into those mountains of her own volition, for reasons still unknown. But it didn't bring the closure they desperately wanted. And so the mystery remains. Sarah Chen walked into the Montana wilderness on an October night in 2019, and she never walked back out. Despite thousands of hours of searching, despite the dedication of law enforcement and volunteers, despite the love of her family and the efforts of strangers who had never met her, she remains lost. The Whispering Pines Lodge still stands, weathered by another 5 winters. Margaret Hartley, now in her late 70s, still welcomes guests, though she has finally allowed her son to take over most of the daily operations. Room 12 is still available, though it's booked less frequently than others. Sarah's blog remains online, preserved by her brother as a memorial. Her last post about Glacier National Park has hundreds of comments from people who never knew her but were touched by her story. They write about their own experiences in wild places, their own encounters with the mystery of the mountains. Perhaps someday, a hiker will stumble upon something, a clue that finally answers the question of what happened to Sarah Chen. Or perhaps the mountains will keep their secret forever, as they have kept so many others. What we know for certain is this: Sarah Chen was 28 years old, passionate about exploring remote places, dedicated to showing others the beauty of forgotten corners. She brought light to overlooked places, joy to her family, and inspiration to those who followed her work. Her disappearance reminds us that mystery still exists in our modern world, that for all our technology and knowledge, there are still questions without answers. There are still places where the wilderness holds its own counsel. And maybe that's fitting in a way. Sarah loved the wild places precisely because they were wild, untamed, unpredictable, beyond our complete control or understanding. Rest now. Let this story drift away like morning mist on a mountain lake. Let sleep come gently, naturally, peacefully. The mountains keep their secrets, and you are safe, warm, drifting toward dreams. Good night. Imagine, if you will, a luxury hotel in the heart of Oslo, Norway. The year is 1995. The Oslo Plaza Hotel rises elegantly above the city, its windows glowing warmly in the Scandinavian evening. Inside, the lobby hums with the quiet sophistication of international travelers, business executives, and tourists seeking comfort in one of the city's finest establishments. On the evening of May 31st, a young woman walks through those gleaming doors. She's striking. Short dark hair styled fashionably, dressed entirely in black, moving with a certain confidence. She approaches the reception desk and requests a room. Her voice carries a slight accent, possibly German. She seems composed, calm, exactly the kind of guest the Plaza Hotel welcomes every day. But this woman is not like other guests, and what happens over the next 72 hours will become one of the most perplexing mysteries in Norwegian history. The woman tells the receptionist her name is Jennifer Fairgate, though curiously, when she signs the registration forms, she spells it differently, twice writing Ferget instead. She provides an address in Verlaine, Belgium, and claims she is 21 years old. She mentions that a companion, a man named Lois Fairgate, will be joining her in the room. And here's where things become unusual. Despite the Plaza Hotel's strict protocols, despite it being a premier luxury establishment where credit cards and identification are standard requirements, Jennifer is allowed to check in without providing either. No credit card, no passport, no identification of any kind. She's assigned room 2805 on the 28th floor. She takes her key card and disappears into the elevator. The receptionist processes the next guest. The evening continues unremarkable routine. But upstairs in room 2805, a mystery is beginning to unfold. Over the next 3 days, Jennifer Fairgate remains largely invisible. Hotel records show her key card being used at various times, entering the room late at night, leaving early in the morning. On June 1st, housekeeping enters the room during the day and finds it empty. The extra blanket they'd provided for the mysterious Lois Fairgate sits unused, folded away. It seems Jennifer is alone. The Do Not Disturb sign appears on her door on June 2nd and stays there, a small rectangular barrier between Jennifer and the outside world. Staff members respect her privacy. This, after all, is what the sign means. Leave me alone. I wish to be undisturbed. During her stay, Jennifer consumes very little from the minibar. 3 soft drinks, a small bag of potato chips. That's all. No elaborate room service meals, no bottles of wine, no evidence of entertaining guests. Just those few simple items. But Jennifer does order room service on the evening of June 2nd. A hotel employee delivers her meal, knocks on the door. Jennifer answers, takes the tray, and provides a generous tip, 50 kroner, a meaningful amount in 1995. The employee remembers this, remembers her briefly, then moves on to the next delivery, the next room, the next forgettable moment in a hotel worker's long shift. It would be the last time anyone would see Jennifer Fairgate alive. June 3rd, 1995, early evening. The hotel management has become concerned. Room 2805 has been occupied for 3 days, and no payment information has been collected. No credit card on file. This is highly irregular. At approximately 7:50 in the evening, a young security guard named Espinaz, just 25 years old, is asked to go up to the 28th floor and check on the situation. Perhaps speak with Ms. Fairgate, collect payment details, resolve this administrative oversight. Espin takes the elevator up. The corridor on the 28th floor is quiet, carpeted, dimly lit in that way luxury hotels prefer. Soft, subtle, expensive. He walks down the hallway to room 2805. The Do Not Disturb sign still hangs on the handle. He knocks on the door. A professional knock, firm but polite. Hotel security checking in, ma'am. Nothing alarming. And then, from inside the room, a sound. A sharp, muffled crack. A sound that Espin immediately recognizes despite the heavy door and concrete walls dampening it. A gunshot. For a moment, Espin stands frozen in the corridor. His mind races. What should he do? He's a security guard, not a police officer. He's 25 years old, standing outside a room where someone has just fired a gun. He makes a decision. He retreats down the hallway. He needs to get the head of security. He needs help. This is beyond his authority, beyond his training. He leaves the door unattended. 15 minutes pass. When Espin returns with the head of security, they use a master key card to unlock the door. It's been double locked from the inside, which means whoever is in there wanted privacy, wanted security, wanted to ensure no one could easily enter. They push open the door and step inside. The scene is eerily calm. The room is tidy, organized, nothing scattered or disturbed. And there, on the bed, lies the body of a young woman. She's dressed in her nightgown. A gunshot wound marks her forehead. A Browning 9mm pistol rests near her hand, positioned as if she'd been holding it when she died. The head of security quickly retreats and calls the Oslo police. Within the hour, investigators arrive. They begin documenting the scene, taking photographs, searching for clues. And this is when the mystery truly begins to reveal itself. The woman on the bed has no identification. Her wallet contains no credit cards, no driver's license, no passport. There are no personal items in the room. No cosmetics, no hairbrush, no toiletries except for a bottle of men's cologne. Her suitcase contains very few clothes, and every single label has been carefully cut away. No brand names, no size tags, no country of origin markers. Just blank fabric where identifying information should be. In her briefcase, investigators find 25 rounds of ammunition. 25 bullets, neatly stored, no explanation for why they're there. The gun itself is interesting, a Browning 9mm, a type commonly used by criminals and by the Norwegian army. But the serial number has been filed off. Another identifier removed, another trail erased. The Oslo police begin their investigation. They check the address Jennifer provided in Verlaine, Belgium. It doesn't exist. They search for anyone matching her description in missing persons databases across Europe. Nothing. No one is looking for this woman. No one has reported her missing. The autopsy reveals more puzzles. The pathologist determines Jennifer was not 21 as she claimed, but likely between 25 and 35 years old. And here's something strange. There's no gunpowder residue on her hands. When someone fires a gun, especially at close range, there's almost always residue. The pathologist notes he's never seen a suicide without any blood spatter on the hands. Yet Jennifer's hands are clean. The position of the gun troubles investigators too. It's held awkwardly, almost upside down. The way someone might position it if they were trying to make a death look self-inflicted. The police interview hotel staff. One employee mentions seeing Jennifer with a man, perhaps 25 to 40 years old, entering the room with her. But the mysterious Lois Fairgate, supposedly her companion, has left no trace. His key card was found in the room and used after the first day. Where did he go? Who was he? Did he even exist? Another detail emerges. A Belgian man, referred to only as Mr. F, had been staying in room 2804, directly across the hallway from Jennifer. He checked out on the morning of June 3rd. But when investigators tracked him down later and asked about Jennifer's death, Mr. F claimed that hotel staff had mentioned the incident during his checkout. The problem? Jennifer died that evening. How could staff have told him about something that hadn't happened yet? Mr. F had no explanation. He simply said he didn't know anything more. The case grows stranger with each detail uncovered. Jennifer's keycard records show she was away from the room for extended periods. At one point, for 20 hours straight. Where did she go? What was she doing? The hotel has no security footage from the hallways. No way to track her movements. Theories begin to emerge. Some investigators believe Jennifer was an intelligence operative, perhaps a spy caught up in something dangerous. Norway in 1995 was a strategic location, positioned between East and West during the fading years of the Cold War. The Oslo Plaza Hotel itself had been the site of secret negotiations for the Oslo II Accord between Israel and Palestinian authorities. Could Jennifer have been connected to those meetings? Could she have been an Israeli operative, or perhaps someone from a former Eastern Bloc intelligence service? The evidence supporting this theory is circumstantial but intriguing. Her accent suggested Eastern European origins, possibly East Germany. Forensic analysis of her teeth, using carbon-14 isotope testing, indicated she was likely born around 1971, making her about 24 at the time of her death. The lack of identification, the removed clothing labels, the careful elimination of all traceable elements, these are tradecraft techniques, the methods intelligence officers use to maintain cover. But if Jennifer was a spy, who killed her? A rival agency? Her own handlers eliminating someone who'd become a liability? Or had she truly taken her own life, overwhelmed by the stress of her secret work? Other theories are darker. Could Jennifer have been involved in criminal activities? The ammunition in her briefcase suggests she was prepared for something. Was she meeting someone in Oslo? Was it a deal that went wrong? The men's cologne in her room, the mysterious male companion. Perhaps she wasn't alone in whatever brought her to room 2805. Despite all efforts, despite DNA analysis and international inquiries, despite the exhumation of her body in 2016 for more advanced testing, Jennifer Fairgate remains unidentified. Her case was officially closed in 1996, ruled a suicide with 99.9% certainty. But many who have studied the evidence believe otherwise. She was buried in an unmarked grave, no funeral, no mourners, just a simple coffin and municipal pallbearers. A woman with no name, no past, no one to claim her. Her possessions were eventually sold at police auction. Much of the evidence was destroyed according to routine procedures. The trail grew cold. Until 2020, when Netflix featured her story in Unsolved Mysteries. Suddenly, Jennifer Fairgate became known around the world. Tips poured in. New theories emerged. People who had stayed at the Oslo Plaza Hotel in June 1995 came forward with memories, observations, small details that might matter. But still, no one knows who she really was. And so the mystery remains. Somewhere, perhaps, someone is missing this woman. Somewhere, a family wonders what happened to a daughter, a sister, a friend who vanished in 1995. Or perhaps she was truly alone in the world, a ghost even before she died, living under false names and fabricated identities. Room 2805 of what is now the Radisson Blu Plaza Hotel still exists. Guests stay there, probably unaware of what happened within those walls. The hotel has changed, the city has changed, but the questions remain the same. Who was Jennifer Fairgate? Why did she come to Oslo? And what happened in those final moments before a security guard knocked on her door and heard a gunshot that would echo through decades of mystery? The answers, if they exist, are locked away somewhere in the past, in a file that was never opened, in a memory someone has kept to themselves, in a secret that died with the woman who called herself Jennifer Fairgate. Perhaps someday someone will come forward. Perhaps modern DNA technology will finally connect her to a family tree, a name, a story. Until then, She remains a mystery wrapped in an enigma, resting in an unmarked grave in Oslo, a woman who vanished even before she disappeared.